6 months ago, I packed up my things and left Canada forever. Now that's because I believe Canada is a dying country, it's slowly sliding downhill, and what we've seen over the past few years has really concerned me, enough so that I decided to make the move. Now this wasn't an easy decision and this cost me a ton of money, over 500,000 Canadian dollars purely in exit taxes, but I still made this move because I believe in getting off the sinking ship before it sinks. In this video, I'm going to share with you the 7 reasons why I decided to leave Canada and why you may consider doing the same thing. Now, the first reason won't be a surprise to any of you, especially if you live in Canada, but that's the cost of living. Overall, the cost to live in Canada over the past few years has increased so much that most Canadians just can't keep up. People are living off of credit cards, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and overall there's just no hope for the future. Now, I won't get into all the details of exactly how much a 1-bedroom apartment costs or the price of food, but you know if you live in Canada that things have gotten so much more expensive. Rents have increased to almost double the price they were just a few years ago. Food costs so much, it's actually ridiculous when you go to the grocery store. It's almost comical. And trying to do even just everyday activities seems like a struggle for everyday Canadians. In fact, I've seen some stats that 1 in 10 Canadians living in the GTA area are going to food banks, which is just absolutely insane in a first world country. Now, I'm someone who fortunately can actually survive in Canada. I have enough money, I can live there comfortably, but I still don't want to be there because it just costs so much money, and why would I spend my money there when I could live somewhere else? Now, the last thing I'll tie into this point here is that because of this insane cost of living, the price of properties, inflation, fuel, everything, you name it, there's just no hope in Canada anymore. I have a lot of friends that are younger and maybe they're early or mid-20s. They don't dream of buying a house. They don't dream of starting a family. They're just trying to get by. They're trying to make enough money that they can upgrade from a studio apartment to a 1-bedroom apartment in downtown Toronto. Even in smaller cities like Halifax, where I actually lived for 2 years, the rents are absolutely insane. And to even get just a decent place, if you want to live on your own, you're going to be paying $2,500, $3,000, $3,500 per month. Most Canadians don't have that margin, especially when you're getting taxed to death, paying for food, you probably have a kid or 2, you have other responsibilities you need to pay for, ridiculously priced phone plans, you name it, everything in Canada is just so damn expensive, and you only really start to realize that when you go and live in other places in the world where things are a normal amount and it's easy to get by as the average person. Anyways, the cost is insane. It's one of the main reasons I moved, but really more so that people are just depressed. No one has hope anymore. No one has dreams or aspirations, and people just don't think they can actually get ahead in Canada because of how much it costs. Now, this next point is not something I ever thought I'd be saying in relation to Canada, but that is crime and homelessness. Now, the crime over the past few years, especially since the pandemic, has risen to such a level that Canada is actually a relatively dangerous place to travel to, especially if you're in some of the major cities or certain parts of Toronto, Brampton, Mississauga, or places like Vancouver. Now, fortunately, I actually lived in Halifax for the past few years. That was relatively safe. There wasn't too much crime. There was a lot of drug use and abuse and homelessness, but I didn't have to deal with mass crime or shootings every single night like many residents of places like Brampton are dealing with every single day. We're seeing home invasions, people with axes attacking other residents, and the worst thing is in Canada, you can't actually defend yourself from any of this. Most Canadians don't own firearms, even though you can, but you need to get a license and there's a whole process. And even if you do own a firearm, if you decide to use it, you're immediately going to be the one who's going to jail. You're going to be the one who's prosecuted, even when someone's breaking into your house. Take in how crazy that is. Someone could break into your house with an axe, threaten your children, and if you decide to defend yourself against that threat, you're going to be the one who's going to court. You're going to be the one who's prosecuted, and the person breaking into your house is the victim. We've seen all kinds of cases of this in Canada. It's actually insane, and we can go through all kinds of other stats like car theft, theft in malls, people just raiding stores. We see people all the time on the streets just getting mugged, and there's no repercussions. Nothing's happening to all of these criminals, and a lot of these criminals are young. Some of them are 16, 17, 18 years old. I personally know someone going to high school in Toronto, and they're scared for their life every single time they walk to school because they've been mugged multiple times now. This is not the life that I want kids of mine or people I know to have to deal with. And it's funny because when I travel to other countries, people tell me, oh, be careful. You know, it's dangerous in places like Thailand or Vietnam, but it's actually the complete opposite. I feel a lot safer in a place like Thailand, where I am right now, than living in Toronto, being in Vancouver, and walking through all of the madness that's going on in some of these larger cities. Now, this next point is one that's particularly important to me, and that is taxes. Now, in Canada, we get absolutely destroyed on taxes, so much so that it's actually close to criminal. Now, there are so many different taxes that we have to pay. Sure, we can look at income tax, which already is insane. And to give you an example, if you're making 250,000 Canadian dollars or more, you're immediately put in a 55% tax bracket, at least if you live in the province I lived in, which was Nova Scotia. Now that means that over half the amount of money you're making above 250K is going straight to the government, and that's before you pay all of the additional taxes that you need to pay. Now that is only about 170, 180,000 US dollars, but in Canada, with the cost of living and maybe having a family or some dependents, by no means are you considered wealthy, and by no means are you getting far ahead of other Canadians. It's actually crazy. I know Canadians making $200,000 per year that feel broke. That's just how expensive it is to live here, especially if you want a decent quality of life and you do have a family or you have other people here. Personally, myself, I paid myself about $185,000 last year when I lived in Canada. That was good. I had a nice life. I was comfortable. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, but by no means did I feel like a wealthy Canadian that could go out and splurge and buy anything that I want. Now, regardless, yeah, we have really high income tax, but what other taxes do we have? Well, you have to pay sales tax. In most provinces, that's going to be 13% or 15%, depending on what you're purchasing. You then have things like luxury taxes if you want to go and buy a nice car or a nice boat. Anything I believe that's over 100,000 Canadian dollars, you're going to pay an additional tax on that. We have carbon taxes. When you go to the gas station and fill up your car, most of the amount that you're paying is actually in taxes, not in the fuel amount, which is insanity to me. Beyond that, we have things like property taxes, capital gain taxes, which recently have increased, and then we have exit tax. Yeah, let's say you want to leave the country like I did, prepare to get absolutely screwed with the amount of taxes you have to pay to the Canadian government just to get out. I myself had to pay close to 500,000 Canadian dollars. I'm going to break that down in a separate video, but the point is, if you even want to get close to becoming a wealthy Canadian, you need to work so extremely hard, make so much money, because half of what you're making is going straight to the Canadian government. And when you actually sum up the amount of money you're paying and how much is going to taxes, people that are in those higher brackets are paying 60, 70, 75% of their income straight to the government. I can tell you, as someone who made a lot of money in Canada, you feel like a resource to be extracted from. It feels like every single day you're paying the CRA, and it's absolutely criminal. It's insane, and there's so many better places to go, which is why I decided to go to Dubai, where now I'm paying zero tax. And by the way, if you guys are considering leaving Canada, I would highly recommend doing it as soon as possible. They're talking about adding just a flat $25,000 tax on top of all the additional taxes you'll need to pay when you decide to leave the country. If you do want assistance with that, I do actually have a team that does free consultations. You can check that out from the description down below. Regardless, let's get into the next point here, which is the lack of services. Now, you would think the amount of money that we pay in taxes that we'd have some of the best public services. We'd have the best healthcare, the best police force, the best roads, the best transportation, you name it. Couldn't be further from the truth. Canada sucks in almost every single one of those departments, yet being one of the most highly funded healthcare systems in the world. Now, healthcare is the main one I want to focus on because that's the kind of common Canadian myth. Well, Canadians have great healthcare, so that's why they pay so much in tax. Couldn't be further from the truth. What I will say, though, is that the good thing about the Canadian healthcare system is that you're not going to go broke if you need some kind of medical treatment. You don't need to be concerned about going to the hospital if you break your leg or if you have cancer, or if something insane happens, you will get treated. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take, and that's really the main kind of gripe that I have with the system. The system is so overcrowded, understaffed, and really just bogged down to the point where I don't want to go to a hospital or a walk-in clinic at all if I can prevent it. If I have even a pretty harsh illness, I will try my best to stay at home and not go into any kind of hospital or any kind of Canadian funded kind of building wherever they're doing medical services, because of just how purely long it's going to take for me to get seen. I've had examples where I've broken my nose, been in excruciating amount of pain when I'm 12 or 13 years old. It takes them 9 hours to see me in the emergency room. I once had a very, very critical medical emergency where I needed to be seen immediately. It took an hour and a half before I was brought to a room where I waited another hour to see a doctor. And the worst part is that most people that are waiting in these rooms, that are looking for treatment, that are going to the hospitals, don't actually need it. They have a common cold, something very basic came up, and they're just taking advantage of the free Canadian healthcare system. Now, I don't want to be racist, I don't want to be discriminatory, but most of the people I see in hospitals, waiting rooms, walk-in clinics, everything, they all are immigrants. They've come to Canada recently, and they're just taking advantage of the system because it's completely free. I don't blame them. I understand why they're doing that. They're paying their tax money. They might as well get advantage of the service. But what happens is you just have this system where so many people are there that don't actually need to be there. When you need something done, it takes so incredibly long. Waiting in a walk-in clinic for multiple hours, it takes your entire day. If you want to go and do any kind of medical thing in Canada, you better budget the entire day. Show up right when it opens, wait in a huge line before getting in the door, and then wait hours and maybe not even get seen. That's what the experience is in Canada. I can tell you because I've gone through it. Everyone I know in Canada has gone through it, and it's one of the worst places in the world to be. Waiting in a holding area to maybe get seen, having no idea how long it's going to take, being surrounded by sick people. That's what you're dealing with in Canada. Yes, when you do get service, okay, it's fine. You're going to get the procedure, things will get done, but it can take months and sometimes even years to get scheduled for surgeries that can genuinely change your life. I know someone waiting over 2 years for a hip surgery. Ridiculous. That's what we're dealing with in Canada after paying this insane amount of tax. Now moving on, we get into wokeism and the overall political climate. Now Canada is just a country that politically is sliding so far downhill. It's getting so insane and crazy, the type of laws that are being enacted, and the types of things that are coming out of these elected government officials' mouths. It's actually ridiculous. And if you decide to walk in a place like downtown Ottawa, you're genuinely going to ask yourself what country you're stepping foot in because of the number of rainbow and trans flags flying around everywhere. Now look, I speak I think on behalf of most Canadians. We don't care. If you're trans, if you're gay, if you're whatever you want to call yourself, no one cares. Go and live your life. You're going to be fine. No one's going to make fun of you. The issue is when you start shoving it down people's throats, which is what has happened recently. For me, I was fortunate to go to school in a time where this wasn't a huge part of the curriculum. It wasn't seen a lot. Even in high school, it wasn't a huge deal. But now children growing up are being indoctrinated by this type of propaganda, this type of messaging. It's insane the type of things that are being taught in schools, what's being rolled into the healthcare system, and overall just a lot of other political things that are happening, like a lot of the censorship bills that are being rolled out, and a lot of the things like hate speech and all these other things that Canada is deciding to do, I personally just really don't agree with. It's not something that I like. The overall direction is really, really scaring me. And again, most Canadians just don't care. We want to live our lives, yet we're being fed all of this ridiculous garbage, most of it coming from the Canadian government. And it's really just kind of a scary time to be a Canadian because your ideas are not safe, they're not protected. If you say the wrong thing, you could have your bank account frozen. If you don't want your children to grow up in a climate where they're being taught that men are women and women are men, then you all of a sudden are going to be an enemy to the government. Anyways, I don't need to get into a ton of this details. You guys know what I mean, especially if you live in Canada. By no means do I care about any of this stuff. I just hate that it's being shoved down the throats, especially of children, and it's not an environment that I want to be in. So now we can get into the weather. Now the weather in Canada just sucks. It's cold, it rains, it's dark at least half of the year. When it's nice, it's really nice and you can do amazing things and take advantage of the great scenery and nature that Canada does have, but the rest of the year it's just miserable. So many people in Canada for half the year, all they're doing is just waiting for it to be summertime. They're depressed, they're miserable, they hate their lives, they don't want to get up, they do the exact same thing every single day. It's actually very noticeable when you live in Canada during those parts of the year. People don't want to do anything, they get lazier, they're more depressed, none of your friends want to go out, and you just live the same monotonous life day after day after day after day, and it really takes a toll on you mentally. I'm not someone who usually suffers from things like depression or mental health, but I can say I lived in Halifax where the weather is so sporadic. You can have temperature deltas of 15 degrees in a single day. It can go from raining and thunderclouds to snowing to being sunny, and it really just completely messes up your psyche and really changes just how you feel, your motivation, your drive. Getting out of Canada and moving to Dubai, especially during those winter months, that was the first thing I noticed. Seeing the sun every day just completely changes your life. Being able to go on a walk when it's not negative 30 degrees, it really is life-changing. That's why so many people, plan their vacations in the winter. They're looking forward to those 1 or 2 weeks where they can get away to the sun. It really is a tough life where for half the year, you're just waiting to get to that sunny time again so you can feel like a normal human being once again. Now, moving on to the last point, I have corruption and lack of freedoms. Now, I will acknowledge that Canada, compared to a lot of other countries in the world, is good. It is a democracy. As much as it has bad things, I am grateful to be a Canadian, and actually I think being Canadian is really, really good when you don't live in Canada. However, Canada over the past few years has seen a lot of corruption, really has locked down on the freedoms of Canadian citizens. And overall, what I'm saying in this point is that I don't like the direction the country is moving in. We're having less freedoms, more corruption, and we're moving more in a negative direction than a positive direction. I'm someone who really does like to follow the trends and get out before it gets bad. And I think in the next few years, we are going to see a really dark place that Canada moves to. And as we continue over the next few decades, I don't think that Canada is going to have that same reputation that it has right now. I can name all kinds of examples. We can look at things like the Freedom Convoy, COVID, vaccines. It was actually insane. You weren't even allowed to travel during COVID-19. You couldn't even go in a car and drive somewhere. And if you did and you got pulled over, you better give a good reason. Otherwise, you're getting a fine. You couldn't even leave the country if you didn't have the things in your arm. It was just ridiculous what happened. And the indoctrination and just the level of false news, fake news, corruption that we saw was insane. Now look, that's probably gonna get this video demonetized. I don't really care. The point is what's happened in Canada over the past few years is really, really scary. I don't wanna make an entire video, and that's not what this channel is meant to be about, but it's something I definitely notice. I know a lot of other people in Canada notice as well, and it's not something that I wanna be a part of, hence why I left. Now look guys, to wrap up this video, I will say that I don't wish Canada goes in this direction. I love Canada as a country. I love the Canadian people. I am still proud to be a Canadian, but I do have to say that it really is just sliding downhill. I hope it can recover. I hope we can get back to the Canada that I remember when I was young, where there was hope, where people were excited to be alive, but that's just not the Canada that it is today. So many people are leaving. I encourage you to do the same if you agree with the messages in this video. If you want, there's a free consultation down below if you want to move to a place like Dubai, but there are so many other great options. Consider Mexico, consider even the United States. Just get out of Canada before you can't. I truly believe soon they're going to make it so difficult that so many Canadians are going to be trapped.